So, what is autism? According to ASAN, which is the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, autism is a neurological variation classified as a developmental disorder. Autism occurs in about 1% of the population. That may sound small, but when you consider the US has 350 million people, that's approximately 3.5 million autistic people. Autism exists in all populations, all races, all sexes. Yeah, it's not just white boys, as has been the myth for many, many years. Autism involves different sensory experiences. That means that lights may be brighter, sounds louder, and colors brighter for autistic people. Most autistic individuals have non-standard ways of learning and problem solving. In lower grades, I would frequently get points taken off my tests or even entire questions marked wrong because I didn't solve questions in the ways that my teachers wanted me to solve them, which is a big banking thing. Yeah, that's gotten a little better in college. Many autistic people have one or more special interests. These are areas of deep but narrow focus. So if you think about the movie Rain Man, he gets really, really good at counting cards. That would be an example of an autistic special interest. For example, my special interests are, for example, my special interests are resin ball jointed dolls. I collect these, I paint them, I'm working on making one. The first two, these are ones I actually own, and this is an example of like what a really, really nice one all made up can look like. Another autism trait is atypical or repetitive movement. Many things originally designed for autistic people to engage in this movement, which is called stimming, have made their way into the mainstream recently. These include slime, fidget cubes, and chewable jewelry are all things that have been big like Instagram crazes in the past year or two. Autism also involves, many autistic people have a need for consistency and order. This means that the transitional times around like the start of a semester or the holidays can be especially stressful, even if it's like a break. The biggest autism difficulty probably is difficulties in language and social skills. These difficulties can range from not being able to recognize sarcasm to not being able to use verbal language at all. It's important to note that just because an autistic individual is not able to use verbal language, it does not mean that they don't understand you, and it doesn't mean that they are stupid. So, now that you know what autism is, what autism is not. Autism is not caused by vaccines. This was a myth created by a now disgraced doctor in order to sell his alternative to the MMR vaccine. Autism is not found only in white boys. This is a common belief for some time, but as I said, people of all races and sexes can be autistic, and autism is a lifelong condition, so autistic children become autistic adults, and so on. Autism is not curable. It is not something like diabetes that can be separated from your personhood. We are born autistic, we live autistic, we will die autistic. It's much more comparable to something like race or sexuality and misbehavior. When an autistic person is doing something that you may find upsetting, like maybe yelling or trying to get out of a loud area, that's not because they are naughty, misbehaved children. It's probably because there's something overwhelming in the situation that they're in, and they're trying to remove themselves from that situation. So, some of you with some background knowledge may be kind of internally screaming right now because I've been saying autistic person instead of person with autism. But the autistic community ourselves prefer this person-first identity, prefer identity-first language, which is autistic person over person-first language, which would be person with autism. This is because, as I said before, autism cannot be separated from your personhood, and saying it in this way implies that it is a disease of some sort. You wouldn't call a gay person a person with gayness. So in the same way, it's weird to call autistic people people with autism. Next is some miscellaneous vocab. Stimming, which I mentioned earlier, is short for self-stimulatory behavior. This includes things like fidgeting, rocking back and forth, and seeking out textures to touch. Autistic simply means not autistic. It was first coined in the 90s in a satirical article called Autism, an Introduction to a Little-Known Condition, which is especially funny, and if you have time, I do recommend seeking it out. Another synonym for this would be neurotypical, meaning the same thing as non-autistic or non-autistic. The final vocab term is neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is a movement and belief that cognitive differences like autism and ADHD are not burdens or diseases, but actually enhance society as a whole and the human experience. So, the elephant in the room, Autism Speaks. Autism Speaks is probably the most well-known autism charity in the United States, and April is their big fundraising month, so that's why I'm bringing it up. You've probably seen puzzle piece bumper stickers, license plates, and cute little cookies at Panera. Autism Speaks is often abbreviated A and then a $ by the autistic community to highlight the organization's money-making goals. I'm going to quote from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network here again. Quote, "Very little money donated to Autism Speaks goes to helping autistic people and families. Only 1.6% of Autism Speaks' budget goes towards the family service grants that our organization's means of funding services. Autism Speaks talks about us without us. Autism Speaks only has 2 autistic people out of the total of 26 individuals on its board of directors," end quote. Autism Speaks prioritizes the autistic family members of autistic individuals over the autistic individuals themselves. Quote, "Autism Speaks fundraising strategies promote fear, stigma, and prejudice against autistic people. Autism Speaks uses its platform and advertising budget to portray autism and autistic people as mysterious and frightening. The fundraising tactics increase stigma and create barriers to inclusion of autistic people in our communities," unquote. Autism Speaks continues to perpetuate the myth that autism is a male affliction with their yearly Light It Up Blue campaign, which again happens in April. They do acknowledge that autistic women and girls exist, but they insist that they make up the minority. Autism Speaks has popularized the puzzle piece symbol for autism because autism is mysterious and puzzling, and autistic people are missing a piece. Well, I'm a whole person, and we'd be a lot less mysterious if you talked to us for once. Autism Speaks also promotes ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis Therapy, which I will discuss a little bit later. And since giving up on a cure for autism because it's not curable, Autism Speaks has been funneling their research dollars into early detection programs with the goal of fetal detection of autism to allow for the selected abortion of autistic fetuses. This is a practice otherwise known as eugenics. So, the history of education for autistic individuals pre-applied behavioral analysis. You may notice that this slide is blank. That is because prior to the 1940s and the invention of ABA, autistic individuals were simply barred from getting an education. It was believed that we were incapable of learning anything at all, and there would be no point in teaching us how to read, or in some cases even how to talk. Many did, indeed, including notable figures like Isaac Newton and Einstein, but only those who were not identified as autistic as children would receive an education. Therefore, there is no history of education specifically for autistic individuals. Okay, ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis. ABA is a style of behavioral modification centered around getting an autistic child to act like a neurotypical child. ABA uses the same techniques used to train dogs to train these children, including food as a reward for desired holistic behavior, and a sharp no, or in some cases, this is still practiced today, an electric shock as punishment for undesired autistic behaviors. These undesired behaviors include things like stimming, which is natural and healthy for autistic individuals, not making eye contact, which is uncomfortable for many autistic people, or simply being a child and not wanting to go along with what the therapist wants you to do that day. This therapy was developed by a man named Ivor Lovis, who also used these methods on young feminine boys who were suspected of being gay to cure them of their homosexuality. We now call this practice, when applied to LGBT and gender nonconforming children, conversion therapy, and generally rejected as an inhuman practice. In the last few years, more and more states have been making conversion therapy illegal. But ABA, when applied to autistic children, is still the main form of autism treatment and is even practiced in our school system. Autistic people who've been put through ABA report PTSD rates as high as 70%. So I was not put into ABA as a child because I was not identified as autistic until much later in life. There are currently 2 paths that autistic individuals are pushed down in our education system. Either they are identified as autistic as young, when they are young, and they're pushed through ABA and into underfunded, understaffed special ed programs that focus more on getting people to act normal than they do on academic goals. Or like myself, they're not identified as autistic and they spend 12 plus years trying to figure out why we don't learn like the rest of our peers and why everyone seems to hate us. Naturally, neither of these produce particularly well-adjusted adults, and we need to do better. To finish off, good charities to support this April Autism Acceptance Month are ASAN, which is the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, which I quoted from quite a bit, and AWN, which is the Autistic Women's Network, which is a group that specifically focuses around autistic women and non-binary people's issues. And that's all I have.
Great, that's fantastic. I have a couple of questions, still kind of forming them in my mind. Does anybody have any comments or questions they'd like to make right now? Okay, so I can go. Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting and good that you pointed out that people like to be called autistic people because I feel like I'm an early childhood education major, and a lot of the classes, even the ones we talk about special ed, say to do children with autism instead of autistic children. I appreciate that you include that because most people don't know.
And that's very, very common. My mother is a special ed teacher herself, and it's something that, even though in the last couple of years she's realized that she is also autistic, it's something that she has to fight against, and even in professional settings, she still has to use the person-first language because it's what's expected.
Right. And the argument is actually, it's a really simple argument to put that designation before the person. It seems like it would be like calling me a person with baldness, right? No, I'm not. I'm a bald person, animal person. You also, let's see, one thing I noticed, was there other comments? One thing I noticed is that you did not use the word spectrum.
Yeah, I didn't use the, so there's no particular reason that I avoided that terminology. I just was worried about my presentation getting a little long, but yes, the official diagnosis in the DSM-5 currently is autism spectrum disorder, and the reason why they did that is because we've absorbed Asperger's syndrome into autism spectrum disorder. Because, I kind of hinted, autistic people have a wide range of issues, and we range from someone like myself, who obviously I'm quite eloquent, I was my high school's valedictorian, to people like my best friend's little brother, who isn't able to use verbal language.
Well, one more thing that I wanted to ask you about is, what do you think about this kind of trend, and it may be coming from the Autism Speaks front. What do you think about this trend of identifying current and historical people as autistic and kind of like promoting them as examples of how even they can achieve and fit in? What do you think about that?
I would say that, one, we can't 100% know if a historical figure was autistic or not. I mentioned Einstein and Isaac Newton. These are people who were pretty sure were autistic. But like most disability, what people call inspiration porn, which is this is amazing. This girl without legs ran a marathon. It's nice in its own thing. It's like, oh, well, good for her. But it can be harmful when it's used well, why can't you have that issue? Why can't you also do that? So there is pushback against that from the autistic community side, where we're like, Well, you know, it's nice, obviously, yes, autistic people can be very, very successful, but you shouldn't hold expectations of your children. I remember, for a good example would be when I was in elementary school, there was a boy named Alex who was nonverbal autistic boy in our class, or like in the special ed class, but got included. It was like an inclusion with our class,
Right.
and his parents insisted that they wanted the teachers to teach him all the parts of the symphony. They were like, he's gonna be a musical savant. They were like, they're like, not knowing anything about their child, not knowing anything about what he likes. They were like, we're gonna make the best of this and make our kid a musical savant. And of course, that's not how anything works. We were in kindergarten. They wanted him to learn the parts of the symphony when we were 5 years old.
Right. All right. Okay, thanks very much. That was fantastic.